Good evening and welcome to a different kind of video from what we're used to looking at here at Gulf Futures. And I want to start by saying this isn't some kind of formal briefing and I'm not a foreign policy analyst, but we do a lot of modeling here at Gulf Futures trying to make sense of what has happened in terms of results, reverse engineering results, etc., and trying to make sense of what the future looks like through various different modeling scenarios and algorithms and analytical frameworks. And I've been following what's been going on between the US, Israel, and Iran since events kicked off on February 28th. And today I reached a point where I felt like I needed to pull it together into something I could actually show people, because beyond the headlines, the death toll figures, and the rhetoric from Trump on Truth Social, all these things, of course, very real, but it doesn't explain why we are where we are, especially today, and why this is the moment that it is, and what the underlying mechanics are, and importantly for us, what it actually means here in the UK. So this is my attempt to unpack that. It's been something that's weighing on my mind for a couple of weeks now. And it draws on a lot of sources, a lot of analytical frameworks, like I say, and a lot of hours spent tracking what's actually happening beneath the noise. So, the Iran escalation game. The three threads that I want to take you through are what is actually happening on the ground right now, what it means specifically for us in the UK, but we will look from a geopolitical and economic global framework space as well. And importantly, what happens with our energy bills, our supply chains, what's our resilience look like, and what is our security? And then the question of whether there is any way out of this, because that question is genuinely live tonight. So what is happening right now? Here's where we are as of this afternoon. Oil is at $116 a barrel. That's up roughly 70% since this war began on the 28th of February. Over 3,400 people have been killed across the region. That's a confirmed figure. The actual number is almost certainly higher, and given the events of today, probably significantly more. The Strait of Hormuz, which in normal times carries around a fifth of the world's oil, is effectively blocked by Iran. And it's not just oil, it's other energy and fertilizer that flows through that strait. Who had on their 2026 bingo card the Strait of Hormuz? Certainly not me. And most importantly, and really what prompted this, was Donald Trump's latest post on Truth Social from this morning. Donald Trump has set a deadline of 8 o'clock tonight, Eastern time, for Iran to effectively reopen the strait, or what he's described as devastating strikes on civilian infrastructure. This is where we are. And this is the language being used. This is the first part of the Truth Social post that Donald Trump put out earlier today. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. Now, he does go on to say, however, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. Now, this is just 2 days on from the expletive-laden post, which essentially triggered this current escalation game. And I've been tracking this situation for weeks, and I've seen a lot of rhetoric come out of Donald Trump, the White House, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, but I want to be clear about what this is. This is a sitting US president explicitly threatening a civilian population. Human rights experts have already flagged it as a potential threat of collective punishment, which is prohibited under the Fourth Geneva Convention. A whole civilization will die tonight. That is not normal. Even by the standards and the language and the behavior that we've seen in the last few years, this is not normal. And really is the reason I felt compelled to sit down and build this today. So who are the actors? Who's actually doing what? The United States launched this war alongside Israel on the 28th of February 2026. Today they struck Kharg Island for the second time. That's the island through which Iran exports the vast majority of its oil, and it's very much Iran's economic lifeline with the sanctions stranglehold they've been under for the last 40 plus years. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, said earlier today also that the US has largely accomplished its military objectives. That would be significant, that could be significant because it suggests that the military phase may be nearing its ceiling. However, we've already heard this numerous times from Donald Trump himself, from Secretary of War Pete Hegseth throughout. So is this really the case? Yet to be confirmed. If it was the case, the pressure would now be diplomatic, and that would put us all in a better space. Now, Iran is defiant, and they have rejected ceasefire proposals to date, which have been, from their view, unrealistic. They are maintaining the Hormuz blockade, but there are reports that they're effectively charging transit fees to ships that do go through. They have rerouted those ships closer and into their own territorial waters by the coast. And alongside that, they have been taking a stand in a different sort of way. They've called young people to form human chains around power plants. Unfortunately, today's strikes from the Israeli side have started to affect civilians more directly. And a synagogue has been hit in Tehran, in a residential area. Sharif University has also been hit. We've seen railway bridges be hit, although they did issue a warning, Israel, earlier today, saying avoid trains and railway lines because they are dangerous for you. So that's 18 civilians, including 2 children, at least, dead today. The international response is important. Now, France and the UN have stated openly that strikes on civilian infrastructure are a war crime. And this is what we're beginning to see. On the diplomatic front, which we'll take a look at in a little bit, Qatar and Oman are, as we currently understand, the active diplomatic channels between Iran and the US. So what does this actually look like for us in the UK? Now, I've modeled 4 scenarios, and I want to be honest, they aren't predictions, and I'm not going to deep dive on them in this video, but they're just a structured way of thinking about what each path actually involves, and I'll get into the deals in a little bit. But scenario A is a deal tonight, and that is unlikely. Unlikely because of the inflammatory language that we've seen. It's not de-escalation season. But if it does happen, we'd expect to see oil prices come back down, inflation would ease, the Bank of England would have more room to operate, the markets would stabilize, potentially rally, and the UK would almost certainly be asked, probably with some of our European neighbors, to co-guarantee any sanctions relief framework. And that would actually be a position of influence. That distancing ourselves that we have, the stance that we've taken since this conflict began might actually put us in a good space here. Now, scenario B is what I think of as the slow bleed. That would be Trump extending the deadline again. The conflict continues at this pace effectively. Oil prices would stay elevated, pump prices would keep climbing, and it would really pose potential for Keir Starmer to take a step away from his "we're allies but we're independent" positioning. We likely have to see a firmer stance from Starmer, but this is the current trajectory if nothing changes tonight. Now, scenario C is major infrastructure strikes. This is where it starts to get serious for us, and there is an elevated risk of this tonight. We potentially see Brent crude go to 130 to 150 pounds a barrel, UK petrol at £2 a litre or above, fuel rationing, recession risk rises, MI5 on alert for potential domestic terror threats. We know that Hezbollah have operated in the UK in the past as well, and we know that plots have been foiled in the past. We'd be in that territory again. Iran has historically activated UK-based networks in response to direct attacks on its interests. So if we did find ourselves either directly getting involved in this conflict or being passive, then this is a space we could find ourselves in again. Passive but allied. Now, scenario D would be a full regional war, and probably a lower chance of this tonight, but it's negligible in terms of the modeling. Really catastrophic economically, globally, from a geopolitical standpoint, what it means for the Middle East, the Gulf Coast countries. You're potentially talking about redrawing the map eventually. Supply chain shortages, fuel shortages, energy shortages, global economic crisis. If Iran hits Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil producer, we are firmly in oil embargo territory. Let's hope that doesn't happen tonight. And I don't want to be sensationalist or doom-mongering. I do want to try and understand how we've gotten to this place. And this is something that I haven't really seen explained anywhere in standard coverage or in the media. And it's the thing that made me think about the situation being structurally different from where it was 3 weeks ago. I know there was ambiguity over what the mission objectives were. We've decapitated the current leadership, but we're in a different space now. And as you can see, there are two forces in tension here. The blue line is Iran's belief that Trump will actually follow through on his threats. So every time Trump has extended a deadline, and he's done it multiple times now, that line falls. What does that mean? Well, it means that Iran stopped taking him so seriously. At the same time, every time he escalates his language, and think about the language he's used, the expletive-laden tweet on Easter morning, and the whole civilization will die tonight. That's about as escalated as language possibly gets. Every time he escalates this, the cost of backing down rises. He's backing himself into a corner where he has to take action, and that's the red line. And around the 5th of April, those lines crossed. We're now in what I call the trap zone. Trump cannot back down without a catastrophic credibility loss. And Trump appears to be someone who cares about his status and his ego. The only way to restore the credibility of the threats that he is making and will make in the future is to follow through on this one, and that is a deeply concerning place for us all to be in. This is the game theory, and it's why tonight is genuinely and fundamentally different from where we've been before. Let's get into it a little bit more. The strategic logic here is what game theorists call the chicken game. Both sides prefer the outcome where they hold firm and the other blinks. Neither wants mutual catastrophe. It's not in anyone's interest, right? If you haven't done, there is a guy on YouTube called Professor Zhang, and he goes into this in great detail. But this is how we've modeled it here. Now, the problem is for the US is that Iran's rational strategy, the strategy that makes most sense for them, is to stay where they are. It's to hold regardless. If Donald Trump, if the US, if Israel strikes and Iran holds, they get a war, which is bad for them, obviously. But they don't seem that concerned about that. They've come out and they've said, we welcome it. We've been preparing for the last 40 years. It's bad, and it's also survivable. They could draw conflict and war out for years, potentially. Now, if Trump backs down and Iran holds, Iran would win maximum leverage. They'd be in a better place from where they started, albeit with the unfortunate damage that has happened already, of course. But do they continue to hold the Strait of Hormuz? Do they continue to toll ships? Do they potentially become a power player in the region? Trump needs Iran to believe he will definitely strike and he will strike hard. But he has said this already. He's said this before. He's not said anything to the extent that he said before, but he has said that they've been decimated, that they've been decapitated, and that they will have the living hell bombed out of them, essentially. And the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, he has also said this on numerous occasions. So do Iran believe anymore? I don't know. Trump's own deadline extensions have essentially destroyed that belief. They've undermined him. They've undermined the threat. They've undermined it. And that's the trap that Donald Trump and the US are currently in. And there's an extra dimension to this that I think is genuinely underappreciated. And that is that the United States has significant forces already based around Iran. We know that the US provides security for most of the Gulf Coast countries. We understand how the US petrodollar system works and the investment from those countries feeds back into the US, and then that lands back into the Gulf Coast countries, which have made a significant amount of money from the oil they've exported from there. Symbiotic relationship, essentially. So, the United States already have approximately 10,000 personnel in Qatar. That's CENTCOM's forward headquarters. They have the 5th Fleet in Bahrain. They've deployed forward expeditionary marine forces, apologies if I get the exact terminology wrong, from off the coast of Japan. They've moved those into position, and we know that other troops have been mobilized and deployed. So, what does this mean? What is the tripwire paradox? Well, these troops, these bases in these Gulf Coast countries were essentially there as deterrents, but they also function as what strategists would call tripwires, because we know that Iran has been retaliating with missiles and drones. But if we see a further escalation, and Iran, who has said that it has been up until this point controlled in its retaliation, only to directly respond to US Israel. And we see significant US casualties or lives lost. The domestic and military pressure on Trump to escalate further will become overwhelming. The decision will almost certainly be made for him. And that's another dimension of the trap. And maybe that's the dimension that he's looking for. And Iran know this. They know exactly where those assets are. In Bahrain, Qatar, UAE. They understand that the UK have got the air base in Akrotiri, that there's Royal Navy vessels in the region. And they've been through these things before. They've lived under sanctions for so long. A war of attrition probably does not strike the same fear into the IRGC as it would to other countries. And ultimately, who's paying the price for that? Still the Iranian people. So what does the way out look like? What would a deal look like? The key insight is this. Both sides have things they must be able to claim. Trump has to claim total victory. He has to claim that the Strait of Hormuz is open, that energy and fertilizer, etc., can flow freely, and he has to claim some form of nuclear concession. And crucially, he used the words complete and total regime change. He's committed to that framing now. And we know that he says things and he reneges on them and he goes back and forth. And there is ambiguity in all of what he says. And he could say, well, what I meant was this. And he has no problem doing that. But it would be victory. He needs victory. That's his bottom line. That's where he finds his off-ramp. Now, Iran has to claim they didn't capitulate under fire, that they held, essentially. The regime's legitimacy is built on resisting exactly this kind of pressure. They've been under pressure for a long time. They want sanctions relief. They need some form of security guarantee because they watch what happened to Gaddafi. He cooperated with them, and 8 years later, the West helped remove him anyway. The revolutionary space exists in that overlap. Trump's regime change language can be satisfied by change in behavior rather than overthrow. That would be acceptable. He'd be slightly reframing his own narrative, but again, we've seen it before. The entire architecture of any kind of deal would require deliberate ambiguity on both sides. And both sides would know it. Both leaders would need to know it. But could they live with it? That's the question. Now, the most plausible deal tonight isn't a grand bargain. It's some kind of face-saving ceasefire. Qatar or Oman or facilitation from them both delivering a private signal that Iran will reduce the Hormuz Strait disruption, then Trump being able to go on television and essentially declare victory. Both sides could claim that they won. Again, deliberate ambiguity. There's a lower probability that we would see some kind of new nuclear deal, but this would lead to potential sanctions relief. If we got a ceasefire, that space to breathe on both sides, that depressurization would allow potential talks. a negotiation to move forward. And then potentially we see a JCPOA too. And Trump would like that because Trump could claim that he took a bigger step forward than Obama. Now, different minds. Could there be a pragmatist approach from the new regime or the people who are in place in the regime? We know that there's been significant deaths in the Iranian regime. We know that the IRGC can be pragmatic. Is there a deal to be made there? Would that satisfy both sides? And let's think about Russia. Russia came out early in the conflict and said that they offer their unwavering support to Iran. We know that there's a relationship there with drones, both in terms of manufacturing and sharing technology. And Russia really is one of the biggest current beneficiaries from this war. The de-sanctioning of Russian oil that was just floating around on the sea has allowed Russia to essentially backfill its war chest. And no one's really looking at what's going on at Ukraine, between them and Ukraine at the moment. So what could something revolutionarily wonderful look like? Some of his language is, I don't know, Disney-esque. This is where we land. Trump posted maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. That phrase is not an accident. It's a signal almost certainly aimed at the intermediaries who are in contact with both sides right now. Trump's essentially saying, I have a public position I can't back down from. You know this, but if you can hand me something I can frame as a win, the door is open. And I'm sure people in his team will be working with the Omanis and Qataris to try and make that happen. The minimum viable revolutionary outcome tonight looks like this. Qatar delivers a private signal. Trump is told before 8 o'clock Eastern. He goes on television and says, I've been informed that Iran has made a very significant decision. He doesn't even need to outline what that is. That's enough to pause, to halt. He can then declare a pause in his infrastructure strikes. Iran's foreign ministry don't need to respond at all. Their silence, take it as acceptance. Both sides can live with that. Both sides can claim victory. Then that could start a clock on a 72-hour window to reach a framework. A proper nuclear deal, normalization, a grand bargain. None of that's going to happen overnight. But it could start if they're willing to play. We'll find out tonight. That's what I've been watching. That's why I built this. I hope it's been interesting. I hope it's been useful. If you have any questions, comments, do drop them below. Stay safe. Take care, and I'll hopefully catch you again in another